He stood on stage in Las Vegas, a god in a white jumpsuit. The music stopped. He crouched low. His hand sliced the air. The crowd roared. This was Elvis Presley in the 1970s, part singer, part superhero. And the superhero part was all about karate. He wasn't just dabbling. He was obsessed. He spent millions. He flew instructors across the country. He founded his own martial arts association. He saw the world through the lens of a dojo. But why? Was it a search for discipline? A way to feel safe? Oh. Or was it just another fantasy for a man who could afford any reality he wanted? The story of Elvis and karate is full of contradictions. It's about power and vulnerability. It's about a search for truth that got tangled up in bodyguards and prescription pills. We know the facts. We have the photos. We've heard the stories. But the more you look, the more questions you find. We are still trying to understand what he was really looking for when he threw that first punch. Number 15. Was karate his way of fighting time itself? Think about Elvis in 1968. He was not the king anymore. He was making bad movies. His music wasn't on the charts. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones owned the world. He was 33 years old. In show business, that can feel ancient. Then came the 68 comeback special. He wore black leather. He was raw. He was dangerous again. He wasn't just singing. He was moving. His stances were wide. His hand gestures were sharp. They looked like karate blocks and chops. This wasn't the boy from the 50s. This was a man who had been through something. He had found something new. He started karate in Germany in 1958. He was a soldier. He was away from home. He was looking for something to do. He found Jürgen Seidel, a Shotokan karate instructor. Elvis trained hard. It was a discipline he hadn't had before. When he came back to America, he kept training. It became a central part of his life. But in the late 60s, it took on a new meaning. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a way to rebuild himself. The old Elvis was a product of the 50s. The new Elvis had to be tougher, faster, more powerful. Karate gave him that image. Peter Guralnick, in his book, Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, paints a picture of a man deeply afraid of becoming irrelevant. He saw his own movies and cringed. He heard the new music on the radio and felt left behind. Karate was a way to be modern. It was a way to be physically imposing. He was getting older. His body was changing, but in the dojo, he was still the master. He could still move with speed and precision. On stage, those karate moves became part of the show. They were a visual symbol of his power. He was telling the world, I'm still here. I can still take you down. His obsession grew in the 70s. He was in Las Vegas. He was a machine, doing 2 shows a night. The physical toll was immense. Karate was his ritual. It was how he prepared his body and mind. Jerry Schilling, a close friend and member of the Memphis Mafia, wrote in Me and a Guy Named Elvis about how serious Elvis was. It wasn't a game. He believed in the power of martial arts to focus the mind. He was fighting the exhaustion. He was fighting the boredom of singing the same songs every night. He was fighting the aging process. A punch is a punch. A kick is a kick. They are acts of pure physical assertion. They defy weakness. Think about the jumpsuits. They were designed to give him freedom of movement. They were inspired by a gi, a karate uniform. The wide belts were like the black belt he was so proud of. His entire stage persona was rebuilt around this martial arts identity. He called himself the Tiger. He wasn't just Elvis the singer, he was Elvis the warrior. This was a man fighting his own decline. Every high kick was a protest against gravity. Every shout, or kiai, was a roar against the silence that was coming for him. He was using this ancient art to fight a very modern enemy, his own image. He was trapped by the legend of Elvis Presley. Karate was a way to create a new legend. One where he was in control, one where he was ageless and powerful. But was it working? Or was it just another illusion in a life filled with him? Did the discipline of the dojo really help him, or did it just give him another stage to perform on? Was every kata a prayer against getting old? Was every broken board a symbolic victory over his own fading legacy? Number 14. Did the Memphis Mafia enable or challenge his karate fantasy? The Memphis Mafia, they were his friends, his employees, his bodyguards. They were his buffer against the world. Red West, Sonny West, Jerry Schilling, Joe Esposito. These men lived in Elvis's world. And in the 60s and 70s, that world was a dojo. When Elvis got into karate, they all got into karate. He paid for their lessons, he promoted them through the ranks. They were his personal sparring partners. They were the ones who had to take the hits. So, were they true believers, or were they just yes men? It's a complicated question. On one hand, some of them genuinely embraced it. Red West, a former Marine and Golden Gloves boxer, was a natural. He became a legitimate black belt. He and Elvis had a real bond through their training. They would spar for hours. According to Alana Nash's book, Elvis and the Memphis Mafia, these sessions could be intense. They were a way for both men to blow off steam. It was a place where they could be physical and competitive without the strange power dynamics of boss and employee. For a moment, they were just two guys training, but there was always a line. And Elvis was the boss. He was the one signing the checks, and he was the one who decided who was good and who wasn't. He handed out black belts like party favors. He would promote guys based on loyalty, not necessarily skill. This created a weird environment. In a real dojo, you earn your rank through sweat and tests. In Elvis's dojo, you earned it by pleasing the king. This is a central theme in the controversial 1977 book Elvis What Happened, written by Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, all former bodyguards and karate practitioners. They described a world where Elvis's karate ego had to be protected at all costs. No one could be better than him. No one could challenge him too hard. Think about the dynamic. You're sparring with your boss, a man who controls your entire life. Are you going to go all out? Are you going to risk embarrassing him, or are you going to make him look good? The West claimed it was often the latter. Elvis had moments of real speed and power. But he was also surrounded by people who were paid to make him feel powerful. They were enabling a fantasy. The fantasy was that he was a true master, a warrior king, and Jerry Schilling presents a slightly different view. He saw the positive side. He believed karate gave Elvis a sense of purpose and a much-needed physical outlet. It was a way for the group to bond. But even Schilling admits that Elvis's reality was different from everyone else's. When Elvis decided to make a documentary about his karate journey called The New Gladiator, he cast his friends in the roles of his opponents. They were part of his movie, his story. They were characters in his drama. The problem was, this fantasy started to bleed into reality. Elvis began to believe he and his team were a real-life squad of martial arts experts, capable of handling any threat. He would devise elaborate what-if scenarios. What if an attacker comes on stage? He would choreograph responses with his bodyguards. It was a game, but he took it very seriously. The Memphis Mafia had to play along. Their job was to protect him, and if protecting him meant playing a role in his karate world, that's what they did. They were caught in a trap. They were his friends, but they were also his employees. They cared about him, but they also depended on him. So they walked a fine line between genuine participation and professional enabling. Did any of them ever tell him he was taking it too far? Did they ever say, Elvis, you're not a real sensei and we're not your disciples? Or was the price of that kind of honesty just too high? Was their loyalty to the man confused with loyalty to his fantasy? And in the end, did their participation in his karate world help him, or did it just build the walls of his isolation even higher? Number 13, why did he try to create his own karate system? Most people who love karate find a style and stick with it. They study Shotokan or Kempo or Taekwondo. They respect the traditions and the lineage. Elvis was different. He learned from great masters. He trained with Ed Parker, the father of American Kempo. He trained with Master Kang Rhee in Memphis. He respected these men. But he wasn't content to just be a student. He wanted to be a founder. He wanted to create his own system. In the early 1970s, he started talking about his way of karate. He founded the Tennessee Karate Institute in Memphis, and he co-founded the International Kempo Karate Association IKA with Ed Parker. But he wanted something that was uniquely his. He started to call his system TCB, or Taking Care of Business. It was more than a name for his band. It was a philosophy, and at its heart was his version of martial arts. What was this system? It's hard to say for sure. It was never formally codified like other martial arts. It was more of a concept. It was a mix of everything he had learned. It had the hard linear movements of Shotokan. It had the fluid circular hand techniques of Kenpo, and it had the high, powerful kicks of Taekwondo, which he learned from Master Kang Rhee. But it also had Elvis, it had his showmanship, it had his rhythm. He would practice his forms to music. His movements were designed to look good on stage as well as be effective in a fight. According to those who trained with him, his TCB system was street focused. Ed Parker's Kempo was already known for its practical self-defense applications. But Elvis took that even further. He was obsessed with real-world scenarios, multiple attackers, his weapons, ambushes. His training sessions often involved role-playing these situations. He was less interested in the sport or the art form. He was interested in what worked. He wanted to know how to end a fight quickly. It was a reflection of his own worldview. He felt he was under threat. His karate had to be a tool for survival, but there was an element of ego, too. Creating your own system is the ultimate statement in the martial arts world. It says you're not just a practitioner, you're a master, you're an innovator. Elvis loved bestowing black belts. He loved being called Master Presley. Founding his own system was the next logical step. It put him at the top of the pyramid. He wasn't just a student of Ed Parker anymore. He was a peer, he was a founder. In 1974, he took a major step. He financed and promoted a film project. It was supposed to be a documentary that would showcase his karate skills and philosophy to the world. He called it The New Gladiator. He flew his instructor, Ed Parker, and his top students from all over the country to Memphis for filming. The footage, much of which can be seen in the documentary Elvis the Searcher, is extraordinary. It shows Elvis sweating and serious, demonstrating his techniques. He talks directly to the camera, explaining his theories on movement, power, and spirituality. He is completely in his element. This was his chance to be seen not as a singer, but as a martial arts philosopher. The film was never finished. The project collapsed under the weight of Elvis's own erratic behavior, but the footage remains. It's a window into his ambition. He didn't just want to be a black belt. He wanted to be a Soak, a founder of a style. He wanted his legacy to include TCB karate. It was his attempt to synthesize everything he believed in: power, speed, spirituality, and showmanship. It was his personal gospel written in punches and kicks. Was TCB a legitimate martial art, or was it just Elvis's personal brand of self-defense theater? If he had lived, would the Tennessee Karate Institute have become a global franchise like a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu gym? And what does it say about a man who, after conquering the world of music, felt the need to invent a new way to fight? Number 12, how did his karate intersect with his drug use? This is the darkest and most complicated part of the story. On one side, you have karate. It stands for discipline, control, clarity of mind, and physical health. On the other side, you have Elvis's dependence on prescription drugs, amphetamines to wake up, barbiturates to sleep, painkillers for every ache. It was a lifestyle of chaos, addiction, and physical decline. How could these two things exist in the same person at the same time? To Elvis, they were not a contradiction. They were connected. He used the drugs to enable his karate. He would take stimulants to have the energy to train for hours, sometimes all night long. After a brutal workout, he would take painkillers for the soreness and sleeping pills to shut his mind off. His friend and karate instructor, Ed Parker, spoke about this conflict. He saw the incredible dedication Elvis had. He also saw the self-destruction. In his book, Inside Elvis, Parker wrote about his concern for Elvis's health, but he also admitted his powerlessness to stop him. Elvis had a unique way of justifying his drug use. He saw it as a tool. He believed that certain drugs could enhance his spiritual awareness. This was a common idea in the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, but Elvis applied it to his martial arts. He was deeply into spiritual books, like The Impersonal Life and Autobiography of a Yogi. He believed he could use karate, meditation, and even drugs to reach a higher state of consciousness. He would have long, rambling conversations late at night, fueled by pills, about the nature of God, numerology, and the secrets of the universe. For him, a karate session could be a spiritual experience. The drugs were just part of the ritual. There are stories from the Memphis Mafia that paint a disturbing picture. They describe Elvis trying to perform complex karate moves while his coordination was clearly impaired. He would sometimes have flashes of his old speed, but other times he would be clumsy and slow. This led to injuries. He would push his body too hard, and the drugs masked the pain and the fatigue. He was breaking himself down. The very thing he was using for control karate was becoming entangled with the thing that was causing him to lose control drugs. The New Gladiator documentary project in 1974 is a perfect example of this collision. The footage shows moments of pure focus and power, but it also shows an Elvis who is bloated and slurring his words. He's trying to articulate his deepest philosophical ideas, but the chemicals are getting in the way. The project was his dream, but his lifestyle made it impossible to complete. His two obsessions were at war with each other. Think about the psychology. Karate provides a sense of invincibility. It teaches you to control your body, to push through pain. Drugs can provide a similar feeling. They can make you feel powerful, tireless, and numb to pain. Elvis was chasing that feeling of invincibility from two different directions. He wanted to be the master of his own body, but he was also a slave to his addictions. This contradiction defined his final years. He would give fiery speeches to his entourage about the evils of street drugs, all while consuming a massive cocktail of prescribed medications. He saw himself as a disciplined warrior, a TCB man. He couldn't see or wouldn't admit that the pills were a bigger threat than any attacker he might face. Did he truly believe the drugs were helping his martial arts, or was that just a justification he used? Was there a point where the discipline of karate was the only thing holding him together? Or did the physical demands of his obsession actually drive him to take more pills to keep up? In the battle for his soul, was karate his shield, or just another weapon he turned against himself? At number 11 were his karate demonstrations real displays of skill or just stage theatrics? When Elvis performed in the 1970s, the karate demonstration became a staple of his show. The band would vamp, the lights would dim, and Elvis would take center stage not with a microphone, but with his hands and feet. He would go through his katas, he would break boards, he would spar with his bodyguards. For the audience, it was a thrilling spectacle. It was a glimpse of the real Elvis, the tough guy, the Tiger Man. But what were the experts seeing? Was it a real display of martial arts prowess, or was it just choreography? The answer is, it was a bit of both. There is no doubt that Elvis had genuine skills. Bill Superfoot Wallace, a legendary, undefeated world kickboxing champion, was a friend and training partner of Elvis. Wallace was known for his incredible speed, able to launch a kick at over 60 miles per hour. In interviews, Wallace has consistently stated that Elvis was legitimately fast. He had natural athletic ability. He had power. He could really break those boards. When Elvis was focused and healthy, he was a formidable practitioner. The basics were there. His stances were solid. His blocks were sharp. His focus was intense. However, a stage demonstration is not a real fight. It's a performance, and Elvis was the ultimate performer. He knew how to sell it. The moves he chose to showcase were the ones that looked most impressive, the high kicks. The dramatic hand chops, the loud ki, these were designed for the back row of the Las Vegas Hilton. He would often explain the moves to the audience, giving a little speech about the philosophy of karate. This added to the mystique. It made him seem like a guru, a master sharing his wisdom. The sparring with his bodyguards, like Red West, was also part of the act. While they did train hard in private, on stage it was a performance. It was choreographed to make Elvis look good. He always won. He was always faster, always one step ahead. It had to be that way. The audience was there to see Elvis the Conqueror, not Elvis the student. The book Elvis What Happened describes how these on-stage demos were carefully planned to protect Elvis's image. The bodyguards knew their roles. They knew when to attack and when to fall. Consider the context. Las Vegas in the 70s was all about spectacle. It was about flash and illusion. Elvis's karate fit perfectly into that world. The white jumpsuit, the dramatic lighting, the roar of the crowd will. It was the perfect setting for a martial arts fantasy. He wasn't in a quiet dojo being judged by a panel of masters. He was on a stage being adored by thousands of fans. The standards were different. The goal was entertainment, not technical perfection. The board breaking is a good example. It looks incredible, but it's also a trick of physics. If you know the technique, you can generate a lot of force on a small area. And Elvis knew the technique. But the type of wood, the way it's held, and the angle of the strike all make a difference. It was a repeatable, reliable stunt that always got a huge reaction from the crowd. It was real, but it was also a calculated piece of theater. So, was it a lie? Not exactly. It was an exaggeration. It was Elvis taking a real skill and amplifying it for the stage. It was no different than a guitarist striking a dramatic pose or a singer holding a note for an impossibly long time. It was part of the show. The problem was that Elvis himself may have started to blur the line between the stage performance and his actual abilities. He was living the role of the invincible karate master, both on stage and off. Was the audience seeing a real black belt in action, or were they just watching a very skilled actor play one? How much of what he did on stage could he have replicated in a real, unpredictable street fight? And did the roar of the crowd for his fake fights make him less prepared for the real ones he imagined were coming? Number 10, what did Priscilla really think about it all? Priscilla Beaulieu met Elvis when she was 14. She married him. She was the mother of his only child. She lived with him during the years when his karate obsession exploded. Her perspective is crucial. What was it like to be married to a man who turned his home into a dojo and his friends into a private army? In her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me, Priscilla writes about the beginning of his karate journey. At first, it seemed like a positive thing. It gave him focus. It was a healthy outlet. He was excited and passionate about it. She even took some lessons herself. It was something they could share. She saw how it gave him a confidence that he had been missing during his post-army movie career. It was part of his transformation back into the dynamic performer of the '68 comeback special. But as the obsession grew, it started to create a distance between them. The house was constantly filled with guys training. The conversations were always about karate. Elvis's world became smaller and more intense. He was no longer just her husband. He was the sensei, the master of his domain. And everyone in that domain, including Priscilla, was expected to follow his rules. The spiritual side of his karate also became a point of contention. Elvis would stay up all night reading spiritual books and talking for hours about his discoveries. Priscilla describes these nights in her book. She would try to keep up, to share his enthusiasm. But she was a young woman who wanted a more normal life. She wanted to go out, to be with friends. Elvis's world was becoming increasingly insular. His search for enlightenment through karate and meditation was a solitary journey, even when he was surrounded by people. He was in his own head, and she often felt locked out. There was also a darker side. Elvis's karate training could be aggressive. He and his friends would engage in full contact sparring. Things would get broken. People would get hurt. For Priscilla, living in that environment could be intimidating. The man she loved was also a trained fighter who surrounded himself with other trained fighters. This created an undercurrent of physical power and potential violence that was always present. The breaking point, in many ways, was her affair with Mike Stone, a karate champion and instructor. Elvis had actually introduced them. He wanted Priscilla to train with the best. He respected Stone. He even had him act as his personal bodyguard on occasion. But Priscilla and Stone developed a connection. He offered her something Elvis couldn't: a sense of self, a world outside the Graceland bubble. In Elvis and Me, she describes how her training with Stone gave her confidence. She was becoming her own person, not just Mrs. Elvis Presley. When Elvis found out about the affair, his reaction was explosive. According to Priscilla, he was enraged. His two worlds had collided in the worst possible way. The woman he loved had left him for another karate man, a man he had brought into his own inner circle. It was a profound betrayal. It struck at the heart of his identity as a man and as a martial artist. The very thing he used to feel powerful and in control had become the source of his greatest humiliation. Their marriage ended soon after. Did Priscilla see karate as a rival for Elvis's affection and attention? Did she resent the way it took over their lives and their home? Or did she ultimately use the discipline and confidence she learned from karate to find the strength to leave him? And what did it do to Elvis's psyche when his wife chose a karate champion over the Karate King? Number 9, did his karate obsession contribute to his death? On August 16th, 1977, Elvis Presley died at the age of 42. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. The toxicology report revealed a potent cocktail of prescription drugs in his system. His health in his final years was a catalog of problems: high blood pressure, and enlarged colon, liver damage. He was overweight and often lethargic. It was a slow, tragic decline. So where does karate fit into this picture? Can something supposedly so healthy be a factor in such an unhealthy death? The argument is that his karate obsession created a dangerous illusion of health. Elvis believed in the power of his body. He was a black belt. He could still move with surprising speed. He could break boards. He would tell people he was in great shape. He would use his karate skills as proof. This might have allowed him to ignore the warning signs. He was judging his health by his ability to throw a kick, not by his blood pressure or his dependency on pills. It was a form of denial. As long as he could still perform his katas, he could believe he was still the tiger. His training regimen, especially when he was not in peak condition, was punishing. He would push his body to the limit. This led to a cycle of injury and medication. He would strain a muscle or twist a joint, and he would take painkillers to get through it. He would take stimulants to have the energy to train. He would take sleeping pills to recover. The martial arts discipline, which should have promoted a healthy lifestyle, became an excuse for more drug use. He wasn't taking pills for fun, he was taking them to be a better martial artist. That was the justification. The book Elvis What Happened, written by his former bodyguards, details this pattern. They describe a man who was physically falling apart, but who refused to accept it. He would insist on sparring sessions even when he was clearly unwell. His pride was on the line. He had to maintain the image of the karate master. This refusal to acknowledge his physical limitations was a direct contributor to his death. He simply pushed his damaged body further than it could go. There's also a psychological component. Karate gave Elvis a sense of control. In the dojo, he was the master. He made the rules. But outside the dojo, his life was spinning out of control. His health, his career, his personal relationships, they were all in chaos. He may have retreated further into his karate world as a way to escape these problems. It was a place where he could feel powerful and invincible, but this retreat was also in isolation. It cut him off from people who might have been able to help him. His world became an echo chamber where everyone told him he was the master. No one could tell him the hard truth that he was a sick man who needed help. Consider the physical stress of his Las Vegas shows. They were incredibly demanding. He would be on stage for an hour, singing, sweating, and throwing karate chops. And then he would have to do it all again for the second show. He was using karate to get through it, but the combination of the physical exertion, the immense stress, the erratic lifestyle, and the heavy drug use created a perfect storm for a cardiac event. His heart was a ticking time bomb. Did his belief in his own karate prowess make him blind to his failing health? Did the physical toll of his training, combined with his drug use, accelerate his physical decline? And in the end, did the warrior mentality that he cultivated through martial arts prevent him from admitting the one thing that could have saved him, that he was vulnerable? At number 8 was his karate film, The New Gladiator, A Missed Opportunity or a Crazy Dream. In 1974, Elvis was at a crossroads. His movie career was over, his marriage was over. His health was deteriorating. He needed a new project, something to reignite his passion. He found it in karate. He decided he would produce, finance, and star in a documentary that would finally show the world his true self. Not Elvis the singer, but Elvis the martial artist and philosopher. He called it The New Gladiator. The concept was ambitious. It would be a feature-length film showcasing the beauty and power of karate. It would feature demonstrations by the world's top practitioners, including Ed Parker, Bill Wallace, and many others. But the star would be Elvis. The film would be built around his narration, his philosophy. It would explain his TCB system to the world. It was his chance to be taken seriously as a thinker and a master. He invested heavily, reportedly spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own money. He flew dozens of people to Memphis and put them up in hotels. He hired a film crew. For a few weeks, in September 1974, this film was the center of his universe. The surviving footage is fascinating. We see Elvis in his gi, leading a class, his voice full of authority. He demonstrates techniques with power and precision. He speaks directly to the camera, his eyes burning with intensity. He talks about energy flows, about the connection between the physical and the spiritual. Without the honor, the discipline, and the respect, he says, the karate is nothing. This was the message he wanted to send. This was his gospel, but the project was doomed from the start. Elvis's behavior was erratic. He was deep into his prescription drug abuse. Some days he would be sharp and focused. Other days he would be bloated, slurring his words, and unable to concentrate. The production was disorganized. There was no clear script. Elvis was directing based on his whims. The film crew struggled to keep up. The costs were spiraling out of control. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, saw it as a vanity project that would never make money. He offered no support. Eventually, the project just fizzled out. Elvis lost interest or perhaps the energy to continue. The crew went home. The footage was put in a vault. The Great Karate documentary was never finished. It became another one of Elvis's unrealized dreams. So what if he had finished it? What if he had been healthy and focused enough to see it through? It could have been a groundbreaking film. It would have been one of the first major American films to treat martial arts with such seriousness and respect. This was years before Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon had made martial arts a mainstream phenomenon in the West. Elvis could have been at the forefront of that movement. The film could have redefined his public image. It could have shown a side of him that his fans never saw. The thoughtful, spiritual, disciplined man. It might have given him a new creative purpose, a new direction for his career. Or was it always just a crazy dream? Was the idea of Elvis as a karate philosopher just too far-fetched for the public to accept? Was it just an expensive home movie, a vanity project for a man who had lost touch with reality? The film's failure is a perfect metaphor for his later years, a brilliant idea, a flash of passion, but ultimately undone by his own personal demons. The New Gladiator was fighting a battle he couldn't win. If The New Gladiator had been released, would it have been a hit or a historic flop? Could a successful film project have pulled him out of his downward spiral? Or was the film's collapse an inevitable result of the chaos that had already consumed him, a symptom of the disease, not a potential cure? Number 7. Did karate isolate him from the real world? For most people, a hobby like karate is a way to connect with the world. You go to a dojo, you meet new people, you become part of a community, and for Elvis Presley, it was the opposite. Karate became another wall he built around himself. It was a way to shrink his world down to a size he could control. In the beginning, it was different. When he first started training in Germany, he was just another student in the class. When he came back to the US, he would train at different dojos, like the one run by his longtime instructor, Ed Parker, in California. He was part of a larger community. He attended tournaments like the famous 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships, where he first saw Bruce Lee perform. He was engaging with the martial arts world, but as his fame and paranoia grew, he retreated. He stopped going out to dojos. Instead, he brought the dojo to him. He built a dojo at Graceland. He converted rooms in his rented houses in California into training halls. He brought his instructors to him. He paid them to be his private teachers. This changed the dynamic completely. He was no longer a student, he was a client, he was the boss. His circle of training partners also shrank. It became almost exclusively the Memphis Mafia. These were men who were already on his payroll. They lived in his world, they followed his schedule, their training sessions became private rituals, cut off from the outside world. They would train at all hours of the night whenever Elvis felt the urge. The normal structure of a martial arts school disappeared. It was replaced by the whims of one man. This isolation was both physical and psychological. Physically, he was sealed off in his mansions, surrounded by his hand-picked group of disciples. He didn't have to deal with strangers. He didn't have to deal with anyone who didn't already agree with him. Psychologically, it created an echo chamber. Elvis was the sensei. His word was law. There was no one to challenge him. No one to tell him his technique was sloppy or his philosophy was half-baked. He was surrounded by agreement. The language of karate also became a kind of private code. He and his friends would talk about katas, about the way of the warrior, about honor and discipline. It was a shared language that separated them from outsiders. It reinforced the feeling of being a special group, an elite unit. This is a common feature of isolated groups, whether they are cults or secret societies. They develop their own jargon and their own worldview. Elvis's TCB karate world was no different. This isolation fed his paranoia. He became obsessed with security. He saw threats everywhere. His karate wasn't just for exercise anymore, it was for a war he believed was coming. He and his bodyguards would endlessly rehearse scenarios for attacks. This wasn't healthy training. It was a fantasy of violence and persecution played out in the privacy of his home. The real world, with all its complexities and nuances, was replaced by a simpler, more dramatic world of good guys and bad guys, of protectors and attackers. And in that world, Elvis was the hero. Did karate give him a false sense of security while actually making him more vulnerable? By cutting himself off from the real martial arts world, did he stunt his own growth as a practitioner? And was this retreat into a private karate kingdom a cause of his detachment from reality, or just another symptom of it? Number 6, could he actually fight? This is the question that always comes up. Forget the stage moves, forget the black belts he handed out. If Elvis Presley got into a real, no-rules street fight, could he handle himself? The people who trained with him, the real fighters, have a surprisingly consistent answer. Yes, Bill Superfoot Wallace is a key witness. Wallace was a true legend of the sport. He was a world champion kickboxer who was known for his blinding speed. He and Elvis became good friends and trained together. Wallace has said in numerous interviews that Elvis was a natural. He had innate athletic talent. He was strong, and more importantly, he was fast. Wallace believed that if Elvis had dedicated himself to competitive fighting at a younger age, he could have been a champion. He had the raw materials. Red West is another important voice. He was Elvis's sparring partner for years. And Red was a tough guy in his own right, a former boxer, and a big, strong man. He and Elvis would go at it hard. In Elvis and the Memphis Mafia, Red describes their sparring sessions as intense and sometimes brutal. He said Elvis was not afraid to get hit and he could hit back hard. He had a killer instinct. This is a crucial element in a real fight. It's not just about technique, it's about a willingness to be violent. And Red West believed Elvis had that willingness. His main instructor, Ed Parker, also vouched for his skills. Parker was the founder of American Kempo, a system designed specifically for street self-defense. It's a brutal, efficient art. Elvis was one of Parker's star pupils. Parker promoted him to black belt and clearly respected his abilities. Of course, Parker also benefited greatly from his association with Elvis, so his praise might not be completely objective. But he was a legitimate master and his endorsement carries weight. The type of karate Elvis studied was also a factor. Kenpo is not a sport. It's about disabling an opponent as quickly as possible. It involves eye pokes, throat strikes, and attacks on joints. It's designed for the chaos of a real fight. This is what Elvis was interested in. He wasn't training for points in a tournament. He was training for what he perceived as real threats. However, there are caveats. And Elvis in the early 60s was a different animal from Elvis in the mid-70s. In his prime, he was lean and quick. By 1976, he was overweight and his health was failing. His skills were still there, but his body was letting him down. His speed and stamina were greatly diminished. The drugs also took a toll on his coordination and reaction time. So the answer to the question, could he fight, depends on when you ask it. The young, healthy Elvis? Almost certainly. He had the training, the natural ability, and the mindset. He would have been a dangerous opponent. The Elvis of the final years, it's a much sadder picture. He still had the knowledge in his head. He still had the muscle memory. But he was a shadow of his former self. He was a warrior trapped in a failing body. The tragedy is that he may not have realized how much he had lost. In his own mind, he was still the Tiger Man. Could the healthy Elvis have held his own against a professional fighter like Bill Wallace in a real match? What was the single most impressive feat of skill his training partners ever saw him perform? And if he was so capable, why was he so deeply paranoid about his own safety? Number 5, what was the real relationship with his karate masters? Elvis didn't just have one karate instructor, he had a series of them, and his relationships with these men were complex. They were part teacher, part employee, part friend, and part father figure. Understanding these relationships is key to understanding Elvis's journey in martial arts. The first was Jürgen Seidel in Germany. This was a classic student-teacher relationship, where Elvis was a young GI, eager to learn. Seidel was the master. Elvis respected his authority. This was perhaps the most normal martial arts relationship he ever had. When he returned to the US, the dynamic shifted. He became a celebrity student. Instructors were eager to teach him. He eventually found Ed Parker, who would become the most important martial arts figure in his life. Parker was a true innovator, a brilliant martial artist, and a savvy businessman. He and Elvis hit it off immediately. Parker became Elvis's guide to the world of Kenpo karate, but he also became a friend and a confidant. The relationship was mutually beneficial. Elvis got access to one of the best instructors in the world. Parker got the ultimate celebrity endorsement. Elvis's involvement helped put Kenpo karate and Ed Parker on the map. It brought a level of glamour and attention to the martial arts that it had never had before. Elvis sponsored Parker's tournaments. He promoted him to his friends. He was a walking advertisement for Kenpo. But Elvis was also the one with all the power. He was paying Parker. This created an imbalance. Was Parker just telling Elvis what he wanted to hear? Was he promoting him through the ranks too quickly because of who he was? Parker awarded Elvis his first-degree black belt in 1960, after only a couple of years of training. This was unusually fast. Later, Elvis would be promoted to higher and higher Dan grades, eventually reaching the level of an 8th-degree black belt. Many in the martial arts community quietly questioned the legitimacy of these ranks. They seemed to be based more on Elvis's fame than his time on the mat, Then there was Master Kang Ree in Memphis. Elvis started training with him in the 1970s. Ree was a master of Taekwondo. This relationship was different again. Ree was a more traditional spiritual master. Elvis was drawn to his emphasis on the mental and spiritual aspects of the art. Ree seemed less interested in the Hollywood side of things. He awarded Elvis a 7th degree black belt in 1973. In his book Elvis and the Master, Ree describes a relationship built on mutual respect. He saw Elvis as a serious and dedicated student, but with all these masters there was a common thread. Elvis was the sun, and they were the planets orbiting him. He could summon them at any time. He flew them around the country on his private jet. He bought them cars and gifts. They were part of his court. This made it very difficult to maintain a traditional master-student relationship. A true master must be able to correct the student, to be brutally honest. How do you do that when your student is Elvis Presley, the man who is paying your mortgage? The story of Mike Stone is a cautionary tale. He was a karate champion whom Elvis admired and hired. But when Stone had an affair with Priscilla, he was banished. He crossed the line and was excommunicated from the kingdom. It showed how precarious the position of these men could be. Their access and status depended entirely on Elvis's goodwill. Were these men his teachers or his courtiers? Did they see him as a true martial artist or as a golden goose? And did any of them ever have the courage to tell him that the greatest opponent he faced was not some imaginary assassin, but the man he saw in the mirror every morning? Number 4, how did it change his music and performance? Before karate, Elvis's stage movements were revolutionary. The swiveling hips, the shaking leg. It was raw, sexual, and primal. It was the movement of rock and roll. After karate, his movements changed. They became more stylized, more powerful, more aggressive. The change is most visible when you compare his performances from the 50s to his Las Vegas shows in the 70s. The old Elvis was a dancer. The new Elvis was a fighter. The '68 comeback special was the turning point. For the first time, you can see the influence of his martial arts training. His stances are wider, more grounded. His hand gestures are no longer just pointing or snapping his fingers. They are sharp, percussive chops and blocks. He moves with a new kind of economy and power. It's less about shaking and more about striking. This new physicality was a key part of his comeback. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man. A dangerous man. By the time he got to Vegas, karate was fully integrated into his act. His famous jumpsuits were essentially stylized jizz, designed to allow for the high kicks and deep lunges that became his signature moves. The climax of many songs would be a dramatic karate pose. A song like Suspicious Minds would end with Elvis dropping to one knee in a deep fighting stance. He was physically acting out the drama of the music. It also affected the rhythm and pacing of his shows. The karate demonstrations broke up the flow of the concert. They were moments of pure physical theater. He would stop the music and talk to the audience about karate, explaining the meaning behind the movements. This changed his relationship with the audience. He wasn't just a singer anymore. He was a teacher, a master. It added a layer of seriousness and mystique to his persona. Did it help his music? That's a matter of debate. Some critics felt that the karate moves were a distraction. They were a form of stagecraft that sometimes overshadowed the songs themselves. They saw it as a gimmick, a way to compensate for a voice that was no longer what it once was. The focus shifted from the sound to the spectacle. Instead of listening to the nuance in his singing, the audience was waiting for the next high kick. But for his fans, it was electrifying. It was part of the total experience of an Elvis show. It was a visual representation of the power of his music. The karate moves were like punctuation marks at the end of a musical phrase. They were physical exclamation points. When he sang about being burning love, the kicks and chops made that fire visible. The karate also likely had a practical application. Performing a high-energy show night after night in Las Vegas is a grueling physical challenge. The discipline and conditioning of his karate training probably helped him maintain the stamina to get through it. It was his pre-show ritual, his way of centering himself and preparing his body for the battle to come. How much of his later stage persona was a genuine expression of his martial arts soul, and how much was a calculated piece of showmanship? Did the focus on physical performance take away from his focus on his vocal performance? And if he had never discovered karate, what would the Las Vegas era Elvis have looked and sounded like? Number 3, was it a spiritual quest or a power trip? This is the central contradiction of Elvis's karate obsession. Was he seeking enlightenment, or was he just seeking power? Was he trying to humble himself before an ancient discipline, or was he using that discipline to inflate his own ego? The evidence points in both directions. The spiritual quest was real. Elvis was a deeply spiritual man. He was raised in the Pentecostal church, but his spiritual curiosity went far beyond that. In the mid-60s, he embarked on a period of intense spiritual searching. He devoured books on religion and philosophy. He was fascinated by numerology, the occult, and Eastern mysticism. Karate fit perfectly into this search. It was not just a physical activity for him, it was a path to a higher truth. He loved the philosophical side of martial arts. The concepts of chi life force, of mind-body unity, of discipline leading to enlightenment. He would have long late-night discussions about these topics with his friends and instructors. The footage from the unfinished New Gladiator documentary is filled with his philosophical musings. He talks about karate as a way of life, a way of understanding the universe. He genuinely believed that through his training, he could achieve a higher state of being. He saw the dojo as a kind of church, but then there was the power trip. Elvis was a man who was used to getting his own way. He was surrounded by people who told him he was the greatest. This kind of environment is not good for the ego. Karate, which is supposed to teach humility, became another tool for self-aggrandizement. He loved the titles. He loved being called master. He loved the authority that came with his black belt. He designed his own patches and logos, like the TCB lightning bolt, which became symbols of his personal power. His obsession with breaking boards and other feats of strength can also be seen as part of this power trip. It was a tangible, visible demonstration of his superiority. He wasn't just a singer, he was a man who could shatter wood with his bare hands. This was an important part of the image he wanted to project. He wanted to be seen as strong, not just famous. The way he handed out black belts to his friends is another clear sign of the power trip. A black belt is supposed to be earned through years of hard work. Elvis gave them out as rewards for loyalty. In doing so, he devalued the very thing he claimed to respect. He was turning a symbol of discipline into a symbol of his own authority. He was the king, and he could make anyone a knight. This conflict between the spiritual search and the ego trip was at the heart of his struggle. He wanted to be a humble seeker of truth, but he also wanted to be the all-powerful master. He couldn't be both. This inner conflict may be one of the reasons his spiritual search never seemed to bring him any lasting peace. He was always chasing a feeling of enlightenment, but his own ego kept getting in the way. Was his spiritual talk just a way to justify his obsession with the physical power of karate? Did he ever truly feel the humility that martial arts is supposed to teach? Or did he just co-opt the language of spirituality to build a new kind of kingdom, with himself on the throne as the warrior priest king? Number 2, did karate feed his paranoia? Elvis Presley's final years were marked by a deep and growing paranoia. He was obsessed with his security. He feared he would be kidnapped or assassinated. He carried multiple guns at all times. He surrounded himself with armed bodyguards. His world was a fortress. The question is, did his karate training help to calm these fears, or did it make them worse? On the surface, karate should have made him feel more secure. It gave him the skills and the confidence to defend himself. It taught him to be aware of his surroundings. It put him in control of his own body. This should have been a source of comfort for a man who felt constantly under threat. And for a time, perhaps it was. It was a proactive step he could take to protect himself. He wasn't just a passive target, he was a trained fighter. But there is a strong argument that his karate obsession actually poured fuel on the fire of his paranoia. The more he trained, the more he thought about fighting. The more he thought about fighting, the more he saw potential attackers everywhere. His mind began to create elaborate threat scenarios. He wasn't just training to be fit, he was training for a specific violent confrontation that he believed was imminent. His training sessions with the Memphis Mafia often involved role-playing these attacks. Who would do what if a crazed fan rushed the stage? How would they respond to a gunman in the crowd? They would drill these scenarios over and over. This kind of training can create a hyper-vigilant mindset. You start to see every stranger as a potential threat. You are constantly on guard, constantly assessing your environment for danger. For a man already prone to paranoia, this was a dangerous mental space to inhabit. The philosophy of his chosen style, Kenpo, also may have contributed. Kenpo is a street fighting art. It assumes the worst. It assumes multiple attackers, weapons, and a fight for your life. It's a brutal and effective system, but its underlying worldview is a dark one. It teaches you that the world is a dangerous place and you must be prepared to respond with overwhelming force. For Elvis, this philosophy likely reinforced his existing fears. His bodyguards in books like Elvis What Happened describe a man who was living in a state of high alert. He would react to sudden noises. He would see threats that weren't there. He once shot a television set because he didn't like the person on the screen. His karate training, combined with his gun obsession and his drug use, created a volatile mix. He saw himself as a warrior, always ready for battle, but the battle was largely in his own mind. He even got a death threat before a show in Las Vegas in 1970. The FBI took it seriously, and Elvis's reaction was to ramp up his security and to carry a gun on stage with him. He was ready for a fight. The threat turned out to be a hoax, but the incident solidified his belief that he was a target. So his karate skills were no longer a hobby, they were a necessary tool for survival. He was living in the plot of a martial arts movie, and he was the star. Did the discipline of karate provide a structure for his fears, or did it give them a vocabulary and a stage to play out on? Did learning how to fight make him feel safer, or did it just make him see more reasons to be afraid? And was his paranoia the cause of his karate obsession, or was the obsession the cause of his paranoia? Number one, was his black belt legitimate? This is the ultimate question. It's the one that martial artists have debated for decades. Was Elvis Presley a real black belt, or was he a celebrity black belt given the rank because of who he was, not what he could do? The story of his first black belt is the most controversial. He was promoted to Shodan, or first-degree black belt, in Shotokan Karate in 1960 in Paris. He was tested by the Japanese master Minoru Mochizuki. The controversy is about the timing. Elvis had only been training for about 2 years. In traditional Shotokan, it takes much longer, often 5 years or more of consistent, hard training to achieve the rank of Shodan. His promotion was exceptionally fast. The explanation given is that he trained obsessively. As a soldier in Germany with a lot of time on his hands, he was able to put in more hours than the average student. He also had access to private instruction, but many in the martial arts world were skeptical. They saw it as a case of a master being impressed by a celebrity student and bending the rules. Later, he was promoted through the ranks of Kenpo Karate by Ed Parker. He was eventually awarded an 8th degree black belt. These promotions are also a source of debate. While Elvis continued to train for years, these high dan ranks are usually reserved for lifelong masters who have dedicated their entire existence to the art and have produced their own high-ranking students. And Elvis, for all his passion, was still a part-time martial artist. He was also a global superstar with a demanding career. It is hard to see how he could have put in the required time and teaching experience to legitimately earn such a high rank. The people who trained with him, like Bill Wallace and Ed Parker, always maintained that his skills were real. They would say that if you ignored the belt and just looked at the man, you would see a talented and dangerous martial artist. They argued that he had the speed, power, and knowledge of a black belt, regardless of how quickly he got there. But the belt is more than just a measure of fighting ability. It's a symbol of time served, of dues paid. It represents a commitment to a tradition and a community. This is where the criticism of Elvis's rank is strongest. He didn't come up through the ranks like a normal student. He was always Elvis. He operated by his own rules. He created his own dojo, founded his own association, and promoted his own friends. He was, in many ways, outside the established system, so does it matter? In the grand scheme of his life, perhaps not. He clearly loved karate. He dedicated a huge part of his life to it. He had genuine skills. But in the world of martial arts, legitimacy is everything. The belt is a sacred object. The idea that someone could use their fame and money to bypass the process strikes at the heart of the martial arts ethos of humility and hard work. The question of his black belt is not just about his technical skill, it's about his character. It's about whether he was a true student of the art or whether he was just another collector who wanted to own the ultimate symbol of toughness. The answer, like so much about Elvis, is probably somewhere in the middle. He was a passionate student and a powerful man, a true believer and a master of his own fantasy. Was his first black belt a genuine achievement or a publicity stunt? If he had walked into a random dojo as a stranger, would his skills have been recognized as black belt level? And ultimately, what was he really seeking the skill and discipline the belt represented, or just the belt itself?